Hey everyone, welcome back to DemDMs. My name is Matt.
I'm Panda Ghost.
And I'm Fox Ghost.
And today we are starting a new series here on DemDMs where we're going to attempt to build a brand new world for D&D together, and hopefully along the way give you some tips for world building, different campaign settings for your games. So if everybody's ready, let's slide on in. So for this video, we're going to kind of take it through the very beginning steps of us building this world. And just for everybody to know, we're actually kind of building this world to work with the adventure that we're also kind of co-writing together. And we started in a video that you'll see a link to up in the corner. Actually, it's this corner. Nope, that corner. Anyway, but yeah, so check that out, because that'll give you some kind of background on kind of why we're picking certain, types of campaign setting, kind of, and like what we're trying to get to make it work with that adventure, right? So just to kind of go right into it here, I think what works best with the adventure that we kind of talked about here would be a high magic setting, right? Now, high magic setting, what does that mean? What is that, what kind of things are we wanting to have be apparent, as someone that's kind of just walking through the world to make it feel that kind of high magic?
I mean, for me, when I think of high magic, I think of at least, 25%, if not 50% of the inhabitants are able to use magic to some degree.
Sure.
Right. And maybe magic, low-level magic items are common, like, little wands of prestidigitation or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it kind of, the way that we're thinking about this is, there's currently like a war going on between a number of factions, and there's kind of also an arms race going on for magical spells and items that can help turn the tide of that conflict.
Right.
So you'll see magic involved in like artillery cannons for that spew magic instead of actual firearm and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Give
magic
it
missile minigun.
Yeah, I mean it needs to feel very commonplace for everybody involved, that they have access to these items, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right off the bat, I'm thinking we're probably going to want to have some sort of college or arcane school that people can go to, in various locations.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing to note here is we're kind of, the way that we usually, or at least I generally world build, is to start small and then work big. So we're kind of going off of like, okay, what are the few things we need, and maybe start from there and then build out, right? Don't try to do everything all at once, because you'll go insane with all the stuff you have to keep track of.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think giving, it should definitely be apparent. I think, what do we feel about the prevalence of like magical creatures, and that kind of thing? I think we had talked about in that adventure of like having a lot of like arcane born creatures and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Golems and other things that would be created by magic users.
Yeah, I feel like automata, like Warforged and stuff like that, might fit here.
Yeah.
Owlbears.
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 Always
Sure,
the owlbears.
Sure. Yeah. I
feel like Artificer,
monstrosities.
maybe Artificer might actually have a place in the setting, potentially. I mean, I'm never a big fan of Artificer, but if it's a high magic setting, it's going to be, in my mind, it's going to be closer to science fiction as opposed to like medieval, science fiction that's like skinned in like a
magic feel.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's the progression and progressive nature of individuals in this time, right? Like what does magic do to a civilization? It inherently creates some sort of higher powered industrial revolution
Right.
almost. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Right.
everything's going to be a little bit more high tech, a little bit more, maybe magically driven, but then something would, say like a low magic setting where you're probably dealing with people caked in mud and everything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
a low magic setting is going to look very similar to our world, right?
mhm.
In the medieval
Oh,
ages.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas I would say ours would a high magic world might look like early industrial revolution. Just instead of engines, you have magical powered things.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so going into, all the types of settings that you can have, we're kind of honing in on this high magic, that kind of leads to the next question of like, we should come up with a kind of list of rules for the world that, we should be thinking about every time we're proposing something new that's being created, a new town or whatever, and seeing if it still fits within those rules. Right. And they should be general, but they should have some structure to them that it's easy to kind of move forward with. I think, obviously if there is a war going on, right, that should at all times feel
Mm-hmm.
present in the
Yep.
minds of the characters and the minds of the people in the world. So you want to have some sign of that war being present, right?
Right. I mean, a good way to do that is having like military recruiters in each town and like having posters
Hmm.
up. Help the war effort. Right. Um,
Yeah,
think
yeah,
World War Two, World War One, World War Two propaganda kind of stuff. Right. Just
Or
sure.
even maybe something a little more relevant. Think Skyrim. You have
Yep.
the Stormcloaks versus the
mm-hmm.
uh,
Empire.
Empire. Thank you. Jeez,
Yeah,
it's been a while. Yeah.
it's
So
okay.
you could have for some of your random counters. It could be you come across a skirmish of, a couple, couple
Hmm.
dozen one faction versus a couple dozen of another faction as just like in a they're battling it out in like a ambush or something. I don't know. You come across it doesn't mean doesn't mean your characters would get involved in it, but they could if they wanted to. But
Yeah, and even to a lesser extent, the citizenry should be, maybe a little bit more mistrusting of certain people from certain areas based off of, factions and things like that within the
Mm-hmm.
war. And like supplies of things might be in a smaller town a little bit more restricted because of that purpose, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
armies are coming through, taking what they need, and leaving whatever else they didn't want. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, in some of the cases. And one of the things that happens in a lot of like war torn nations is you have these kinds of dens of crime and unrest where people kind of find safe haven from the war.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had mentioned in the video of maybe creating a city where um, the characters would be able to hide out from both or however many factions there are of this war, and aren't really patrolled by the governments and is a little bit more secluded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a couple of places around the area that are a little bit more, neutral in terms of the war, right? And that can instantly give you a different flavor per each city, of like what side of the conflict they're on, if at all, right? Okay, so yeah, so we definitely want to feel the impact of war wherever we are,
Right.
right? We want there to be a prevalence of magic in civilization, that even commoners have access to it and to maybe a smaller degree,
Mm-hmm.
right? We talked about warforged and artificers and things of that nature being a little bit maybe more prevalent in this kind of a setting, giving it more of a Eberron kind of vibe.
Yeah.
In the
I mean, it
retrospect, they have access to that.
doesn't have to necessarily go full Eberron
No,
esque.
no. Yeah, I think we're trying to find something that's it just makes sense why these things are prevalent in society,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because one of the things that you have to think about in D&D now is, are you including all of the races that are accessible within the 5th edition books, and if so, how do they fit into your world, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it obviously doesn't have to be, a one-to-one. If you didn't want to add certain denizens, you don't have to. But like, are we thinking, there's a hodgepodge of different varying races, and the war is not necessarily between racial divides, but is more just like location based conflict.
Um, I mean, I like the location based conflict because
Mm-hmm.
the in D&D, a lot of the times, or in a lot of fantasy settings in general, it seems very race race based divisions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you have the elves fighting the humans, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is fine for some settings, but I think
Mhm.
for specifically the one we're working on right now, um,
It
I
just feels
don't.
a little bit more that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, also at the same time, just to say that this war is one way does not mean, there wasn't a war previously that was that way either as well.
true.
Right.
We're not going too far into the history yet. I think that kind of
That'll
comes
come
more
later.
on the
Mm-hmm.
story and adventure side to kind of flush that out. But for right now, we just wanted to think about, okay, what's the present state of the world, because that's really what at the onset of writing an adventure matters, right?
Right.
What's currently happening. um, I think I generally don't like, continuing on a little bit here, I don't like, a singular continent based world. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's a little bit limiting, like Forgotten Realms
Mm,
has like islands and stuff around it, but it's kind of just one big landmass.
right.
You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Whereas you go to something like Exandria from Critical Role, where it's, multiple continents and they each have their kind of different vibe to them. And I kind of like the latter way of doing that. And you also can then justify different climates and things like that if you wanted
Mm-hmm.
to do different
Hmm.
variations in terrain.
Yeah. On a general note, I find 2 to 3 continents to be the easiest to deal with,
Hmm.
in terms of world building.
Sure. Yeah, and also at the same time, if it's high magic, transportation between those continents and
Right.
locations is probably extremely easy.
Right. And that was gonna be my point. Since we're not like a lower magic setting, is kind of harder to have multiple continents and be relevant, right?
Hmm.
Because the lower magic setting, it's going to be harder for them to get around from continent to continent, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think building any type of city, you just have to think about how would magic improve this city
Hmm.
in each aspect of the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe there's some magical creature or magical spell that automatically cleans the sewer pipes beneath the city, you know what I mean, or whatever the case may be, right? Like you kind of just need to think of it from that aspect of it, a little bit. All
There
right,
is
any
no
other?
sewer. Oh, I got an idea. There is no sewers. It's just all toilets are just interdimensional storage spaces.
Oh God. And then you could have one of the bad guys like plane shift one of the characters to that location.
Ah!
The poop plane.
Oh, no,
A plane of poo.
Yeah.
no. Oh,
Goodness.
no.
Um, are there any other like major rules we want to talk about? I mean, we didn't really talk about any of like divinity, which comes into play for divine casters.
Right. So I know. So I've noticed that 5e tends to move away from the pantheon, like how 3-5, if you were a cleric or a paladin, you were a cleric or paladin of a specific deity. I know Critical Role kind of brought that a little bit back.
Hmm.
But That's one
it's a
thing I
little
was
bit more
thinking.
free. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I was thinking of is, each town, since this is a higher magic setting, we'd probably have at least one, small magical shop perhaps, and then probably a small temple as well to.
Hmm.
So the next thing we have to ask is, do we come up with our own pantheon, or do we use like the pantheon that is already existing?
I think for the purposes of copyright infringement, maybe we should come up with our own.
Yeah.
But
That's fine. I was just
no, no, no.
wondering.
But you bring up a good point. I mean, a lot of D&D worlds tend to be polytheistic, right? Is that okay with us, or do we want to have a pantheon, or do we want to have a singular deity that governs all domains?
I like a pantheon strictly
Hmm.
Yeah,
because like each cleric subclass kind of like puts it towards a different, you know,
Sure.
like a god of life is not going to be there. A cleric of life isn't going to necessarily be worshiping the same god as a cleric of death, right? Like that
Sure.
doesn't make a lot of sense
Yeah.
in terms of mechanics, right? I mean,
Yeah, and one thing that I always didn't really, I mean, it's described in the DMG that, in all worlds, deities are known to exist, right? Um, I never subscribed to, or I'd rather think that you could also keep that, but maybe, based off of location and culture, your god of life has a different name and a different, feel to
mhm.
them than the god of life from a different location,
right.
right? Because those kinds of divides add cultural flavor
I mean,
to
just
them.
think of the Greek gods. They're called one thing in Greek and another in Roman,
Hmm.
but they're basically the same god. So kind of like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and I think that's an easy way for even just a easy differentiation between different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
From one continent to the next, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Yeah, we could have multiple gods of the same. Could be the same god. Could be different gods that people believe
Yeah,
in, with depending on what landmass they originate from.
sure. And now,
So
how do we feel about other planes of existence?
I think since we're um,
I mean, we have to have the poop plane, so obviously.
yeah, I mean, I think since we are trying to have this mesh with 5e
Mhm.
easily enough, I think all the other planes just kind of this is just a
Exist.
replacement for the material plane in
Sure.
D&D.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that normally comes up with that is where do the deities exist and how are they, separated? Are they separated from the world? Are they more directly enacting? How do they manifest, I guess, is the question. Are they on another plane of existence and therefore they can only touch certain people, that these being their clerics and possibly paladins, or is it, they're able to come and go as they please, more like kind of like the Greek pantheon, where they would show up as a couple of different animals and yeah,
unspeakable things.
yes,
I kind of like it in more the Greek way. Um,
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't want them to directly act because I feel like that gets in the way of player agency. But
Yeah.
like I like the idea that at any moment the random cow that the characters are walking past could be the deity of farming or whatever. You know what I mean?
yeah, sure.
Like that just would be interesting. Um, so yeah, I like that. I like their because then you also don't have to come up with a reason why they're separate, right? Again, going back to Exandria because that's what a lot of people are familiar with. The idea of the divergence and the schism, like those types of things, and the calamities. Why the gods are not accessible, right?
Hmm.
But in our world, they are. They're just not as directly acting, maybe.
Yeah, they
So
might not always give a flying.
Rat's
yeah, I
butt.
mean,
Yeah.
there could be some sort of ordinance amongst the gods that says, you're not allowed to directly act on the material plane, right? And then that solves the problem. Like they can still be there, they can still talk through their, servants and their priests and things, but they're not able to actually engage in conflict or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good. I think we gave ourselves a lot to think about there, because there's a lot that opens up.
Honestly, when I'm creating a new world, the first thing I think of is, I know this is kind of not what a lot of people do, but I always start with an origin story for that world, the genesis, if you will, because I find that if I have a solid base for the pantheon, it makes creating different continents and cultures a little bit easier, but that's not. It takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I think also, like, obviously us possibly kind of trying to flesh out this entire setting, we're going to try to flesh out as much as we can over time. But somebody who's just world building for a short adventure, you kind of just need to know come up with stuff when your players interact with it, right? If you have one cleric in your party, you don't need to come up with an entire pantheon. Come up with that deity, right? If that, you know what I mean? But for us, we're going to kind of try to give ourselves a strong foundation moving forward, because this is going to be a series of videos that's going to be, once a month, where we're going to kind of come back and revisit and maybe add some stuff and whatever else. Okay, cool. What do we think about kind of capping this one off with giving this world a name? All right, so I think why don't we each come up with one here, and we'll kind of pick the one that we like the best. All right. So the one that I like the most from the ones that I kind of was perusing and kind of inspired by was Isurus.
Okay.
Okay.
I came up with Travolta.
Okay.
Like John Travolta?
Oh. Never mind then. What did you come up with, Fox?
Arenia. So I thought of Arcane, Arcania, Arania.
Okay.
Since it's supposed to be high magic.
Matt, what was yours again?
Isurus.
So it's down to me because I hate mine.
Sorry.
Swordfish Planet. That's what it's called. John Travolta jokes.
Fox, what was yours again?
Arenia.
I think I like Matt's more.
Yeah, I like Matt's more too.
Woo! All right. Well, I think what we'll do here is, everybody who's, watching this, if you have any suggestions for us on our world Isurus, or if you hate the name and you think it should be Fox Ghost's name, that's fine, or Travolta, put that down in the comments, and we'll try to kind of read that through to see suggestions, and maybe that'll pop up in one of the next videos or so. But make sure that you're liking this video, subscribing, and sneak attacking that notification bell to be notified when the next video in this series comes out. And make sure to also pay attention to our adventure series that we're also going to be putting out once a month. So, but until then, join us next time we slide into DemDMs. All right, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Peace.